Guys, welcome to the League Crawler podcast. We are at episode 12. I know you guys can see in the title we have a very special guest today. We're going to break into some of this news and then we'll get started. The Brotherhood League is giving out over $500 worth of merchandise starting on 4/9, which is this Friday. If you guys want any info, go over to their social media on Twitter. It's at BrotherhoodLG, and they will hook you up with their Discord information. You guys can get going over there. Big shout out to them for hooking people up with merchandise. There is a new league going on that is kind of a big deal. It is called Pros vs. Schmoes. How this all started was a representative for Kyler Murray, Hollywood Brown, Cody Ford, Trey Sermon, OFAB from 2K, and Quinn Cooks from the NBA has reached out. They asked us to get a league started. These guys wanted to play with real community members, so that is going. Huge shout out from Soden over at Soden Bowl, Bradley and his team over at Elite, Matt and the team over at League Crawler, Brian and his team over at Madden Elite Revolution, 40 Low in the Madden first Nights, Hop and MSR, and everybody else that is out there, and a pros. It is awesome. If you guys want Jakari's Twitch, head over to twitch.tv/Jakari3X. He does a lot on his. He's a fun follow. Get over there and check it out. Patreon has also been updated for League Crawler. If you would like to get more support from leaguecrawler.com for your leagues, head over, click that Patreon link. It has some special instructions if you guys would like to see more help from leaguecrawler.com for your leagues. Now that that stuff's out of the way, I have got to tell you guys, I am very, very excited for our interview today. Today, I have Mr. Rex Dickson. Rex, how are you doing?
Good, Mo. How are you?
I'm actually doing really well, man. I've been doing these for 12 weeks now, but I got to say this is one of the most exciting ones I've done just because of the impact you've had on my gaming life. So this is a really cool moment for me.
Oh, thanks. I really appreciate that.
Now, before we really dive into the games that you've done and some of the questions I've got, because this is going to be a lot more than just Madden. I went into a deep dive with everything that you've been doing. I realized, though, that you have spent some time in Arizona. Is that correct?
Yeah, very early in my career. It's kind of where I started out my career in development. I was in the Mesa, Tempe area.
Yeah, so from one Arizonan to a fellow Arizonan for a time, congratulations on beating the heat because it's starting to get to be up over 100 already this year.
I imagine. Yeah, that was a fun time in my life. I got into the, believe it or not, the rave scene out there. This was like 98, 99, and went to a lot of these desert parties.
Oh, yeah.
I have very fond memories, and some of the best friends that I've ever met in my life were from that era.
Yeah, no, the Tempe area and the Arizona crowd can be a lot of fun, man. It's a good place to grow up. Now, I also was shocked because I'd been following your career for a while, but I didn't know that you played NCAA football. Like, you played 4 years, correct?
Yeah, from 91 through 95. And then my senior at Marist, we were a Division I AA school. Mm-hmm. We played in the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference, and my senior year, we won a conference championship.
Yo, man, that is big time. That's pretty awesome. Now, from graduating college, you get into the gaming world at some point, and the very first project you start working on is a game called Reverant. Do I have that information correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, I'm not going to – when I went through this, I really wanted to see what Reverant was because for me, I feel like people jump into projects they want to start working on. So for this being your first game, I wanted to see what this game was all about. Now, for the viewers or the listeners that don't know what Revenant is, I'd like to read off a description and you tell me how accurate this is, all right? Now, this game follows Locke D'Averam. Do I say that right?
Close enough.
Okay. And as he comes back to the dead, he is asked to rescue Lord Tendrix, who's the ruler of the land's daughter from a cult called the Children of the Change. That's the premise of the game, right?
Yeah, more or less.
That sounds like an incredible story. Like, as someone that's a huge RPG fan that likes doing these, what made you go from NCAA football, getting into the gaming world, and then diving into a game of Revenant that followed this story of Locke as he comes back from the dead?
Great question. So to go back a little bit, my first job in gaming was with quality assurance analyst for Acclaim Entertainment. And this is before they went, out of business. And I was testing quite a few games there. Frank Thomas Big Hurt Baseball was one of them. NFL Quarterback Club was another. But I became a lead tester on the original Turok Dinosaur Hunter on the Nintendo 64. But, I didn't want to get stuck in that QA trap. It's something in the industry where, it's very hard to get out of QA and into development. And if you spend too long in QA, it seems to get harder and harder. So there was really no developers in the Northeast. Acclaim was located in Glen Cove, New York, out on Long Island. And, my only exposure to developers was the developers I was talking to on the bugs I was writing. And so I decided to move out to Arizona and go to the school called University of Advancing Technology, which I believe is still there. And they had a very young game design program there. This is just when colleges had started to offer such a thing. And so I went to school. I already had a college degree, but I was working towards learning programming and 3D art and game design. And in my first semester, I decided I wanted to get some real world experience. And there were only 2 or 3 studios in town. One of them was Rainbow Studios, who's still around and making, I think, Monster Truck and MX games these days. And I banged on their door, and there was another studio called Cinematics who was making an RPG, and I banged on their door, and neither of them would hire me just based on QA experience. So after a couple months, I banged on their door again. I was not going to give up that easily. And I said to the guys at Cinematics, I'm like, look, you don't have to pay me. I'll do it for free. I'm going to school and I just want experience. So like unpaid internship is fine with me. And they brought me on. And, I started as an unpaid intern, and then somehow, some way, within a few months, I was offered a full-time role as a game designer. And I ended up leaving school because it was just eating, 90% of my time. And that's how it all started. So that's how I actually got into the project. It wasn't about picking an RPG. It was about somebody was willing to give me a chance when I said, you don't have to pay me. And that's how the ball started rolling.
Interesting. Okay, so from there, just based on the timeline that I have, you start getting into games like Turok, where you are the assistant lead designer. Now, as somebody that's a huge dinosaur fan, I loved when I was growing up watching stuff, Jurassic Park, all these different things. Is there a place in today's games for those type of dinosaur hunters or those dinosaur games? Because it doesn't really seem like a niche that's really being followed at the moment.
Yeah, well, I think some of the people who play Ark might disagree with you. Ark has a really heavy dinosaur presence. You can even farm dinosaurs, I believe. But I think the Turok license is pretty much dead. But I always felt and still feel to this day like Guns and Dinosaurs is just a perfect mix, like a first-person shooter where they're dinosaurs. Even Fortnite right now is pushing into this territory with their Primal season. They just introduced Raptors, and I'm sure they'll push it even further. I know that, there was at least one major studio I'm aware of, who was making a first-person shooter with time travel elements and dinosaurs in it, and that project ended up getting canceled. But they were pretty far along with it. So I think the opportunity is still there. It's just a question of, someone seizing on it the right way. Another great example is probably Horizon Zero Dawn. Even though those aren't like traditionally dinosaurs because they're mech dinosaurs, they're clearly based off, dinosaurs. And interacting and fighting with them is one of the reasons that game is so popular.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that's over, and that's on PlayStation, if I remember correct. Ark has been something I've been meaning to check out, and I'm glad you brought that up because I'll probably go download that now after this conversation. But I had not been able to get into the other ones on the PlayStation as I'm solely on Xbox at the moment. After that one, though, you kind of get into a world that, again, I mean, you go from dinosaurs, which was something I loved as to a kid, to one of my heroes as a kid, and that's Indiana Jones. What was it like to be able to get involved in a project of that magnitude with a character like Indiana?
That was an interesting one. The studio was called The Collective at the time, who are now, believe it or not, they were called Double Helix for a while, but now they're Amazon Game Studios, and a lot of those people are still around and still there. They had a relationship with LucasArts, and then I think that the game that they made was called, there was an Indiana Jones game they made back in that time that I can't remember the name of, because I keep getting it conflated with the movies. But they made a pretty good Indiana Jones like side-scrolling type 3D game. And I actually played it and really liked it, but I that wasn't the team I got hired on. But after they finished that project, that was when the script for, I think, the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I think, was being worked on. And so they wanted us to make a game based on that movie, but the script wasn't done. And so we were sitting around, and I was a lead designer on that project, and we basically said to LucasArts, like, hey, while we're waiting to figure out what game you want us to build and what the environment is and what the story is going to be, why don't we work on bonus missions? And we pitched them an idea for, some levels based on the original trilogy. And we actually got approval and we started working on it. And so we built a big prototype level based on the first opening scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he's like in the Jovitos temple and the ball's chasing him and he steals the idol with the sandbag. And that was like, a good 45 minutes of playable content that we delivered to LucasArts. And unfortunately, what happened is Lucas was working on another Indiana Jones project internally, and they ended up deciding to pull it in-house. They felt like the license was too big to trust to an external developer. And so they decided to pull it in-house. And shortly thereafter that, I left to go join EA in the Medal of Honor team.
Yep, that's where I was getting into next. Now, this is the big area where I think you start to make a big impact on my life as I was growing up. As being an adult now, 34 years old, Medal of Honor was really the first game I was able to dive in with all my friends, and I felt like that was the game we really just kind of grasped onto. What was it like going into a major studios like EA and then getting into that Medal of Honor category, that whole franchise?
Yeah, the working for EA was a bit of a culture shock because this is a massive team and a huge brand at the time. Medal of Honor Frontline, which I think was on the PS2, was a hugely transformative game for me. One of my favorite FPSs of all time. And a lot of the people who worked on that became my mentors. There's a guy named Christopher Cross, who's still in the industry, who was like the design director on that project. And he's one of my biggest mentors, and we're friends to this day. We actually worked together again on Homefront a little bit later. So huge team. But, they had just built this big studio in Burbank, and they were all enamored with Hollywood. And they built this game, I think it was called, it wasn't Pacific Assault, a console version of in the Pacific. I forget which Medal of Honor it was, but
European Assault.
No, it was before that. It was the Pacific game. It had an elephant riding sequence in it. I came in at the tail end of that. They just wrapped it, but it didn't do as well in reviews because the entire game design document was like written like a movie script. And so after that, we started working on European Assault, and I was a lead level designer on that project, and just learned, to work on a team at scale with several hundred developers working on that project. And that was European Assault was a pretty decent game. Had some good ideas in it, but I don't think we ever realized the full potential of that brand, especially not in those days. Because I don't think we ever delivered something that was as high quality as Frontline. But yeah, that was the beginning of my time with EA.
Right. So you spend almost 6 years doing the Medal of Honor franchise. You take a couple years away from EA, going over to TQ, doing some stuff over there. But then you make your way back. And I think this is where everybody that's listening today is really interested in, because then you dive into NCAA and then eventually Madden. What was it like then to go from this career of NCAA football? You played it yourself, you get into designing games, and now you're back not only designing games, but for a sport that I'm assuming you love to the point because you wanted to play it at the collegiate level.
Yeah, so, the NCAA football franchise had always been probably my most played game, my favorite video game franchise of all time. And every year I would just sink tons of time into my franchise and Road to Glory modes. So when I got that job, which was a big deal for a lot of reasons, but I had taken a job with THQ after Homefront and moved to Australia to work on this Avengers game, which ended up getting canceled. And so I also got married, and my wife was pregnant, and then that studio got shut down by THQ. So I basically found myself back in the States without a job, with a pregnant wife and no health insurance. And I was interviewing like a madman. And I had several offers, including one that I was kind of verbally accepted. And that's when, Tiburon called me and they're like, we'd like to make you an offer to be a creative director on our gameplay group. And so that was like the biggest opportunity that anyone had ever given me before. And the opportunity to work on your favorite game franchise of all time was just, kind of staggering in its scope. And I was just so excited to have the job and to work with that team that I respected and loved so much. But yeah, it was just awesome, man. And especially the NCAA team did not disappoint in terms of just loving the people on that team and thinking, how talented they were and how much passion they had for the franchise. Ben Hawmiller, who was, still there, and he was like a big, kind of the voice of the team at that time, and so many others. It was just a dream job, a dream come true.
When I reach out to people from all over the industry, people that are currently involved over at EA, people that are just wanting to play games, you have a reputation that's almost unmatched. I have not heard a single person come out and say a bad word about working with you, about the way that you pushed people, about the drive that you had. But it's also established almost like this cult following where you're just kind of attached to the glory days of what football gaming used to be. Can you give the people listening a little bit of view on how that how that kind of helped you guys establish what you're doing in the video games? And I mean, it's a hard question because you do have this cult following. You do have people looking at the current developers and going, this is something that we want to see, and this is what it used to be. But I know the job is harder now, So what was it like to kind of be that guy that everyone points at and goes, well, Rex knows what this is supposed to look like?
Well, part of that is recency bias. If you look at the last few years of my time on Madden, I was not a popular individual. I was blamed for a lot of, the decisions and the direction things had gone. And so, if we talk back to NCAA, I think a lot of the credit goes to Jeff Lurr, who was the creative director on that franchise, and Ian Cummings, who ran the gameplay team before I got there. Most of what I did on NCAA was kind of, picking up where they left off and continuing the thread. I think we had a really good year with NCAA 14, focused on the right things. The Oregon offense was big then under Chip Kelly, and we built this big spread option playbook. We focused on the option. That was very successful. But yeah, I mean, a lot of that is, and I don't know exactly how it happened, but when I left, a lot of people were very happy because they thought, all the mistakes of the past will now be corrected. But somehow over time, it's become this thing where people actually appreciate, I guess, where we were, what we had at that time. We had a lot of good years, and then things started to go south a little bit for a large variety of reasons. But I think the peak for me was definitely NCAA 14. And then on the Madden side, Madden 16, Madden 17. But then there were all kinds of external factors like, the introduction of Frostbite and all these resources being pushed towards Longshot. And, Mutt had kind of taken off right underneath us. And the MCS had just started the esport, and a lot of emphasis started shifting away from what I valued, which was franchise mode and simulation football, was moving over to like Mutt and arcadey abilities and stuff like that, which was kind of the beginning of my, self-introspection to be like, hey, maybe the way this thing is moving doesn't match with my sensibilities and what I would like to do. And so that's sort of what started the process towards me ending up leaving.
Right. I know that when we talked previously, I told you I don't have any hate for the product that EA puts out. I still get a lot of enjoyment for the stuff they were doing, but I do want to make sure our listeners have an understanding of how this all works, because I think the biggest reason that companies like EA, and not just EA, because it's almost any gaming company out there that puts out a product that people aren't happy with, they always tend to get this hate on social media. But I also think it's a lack of understanding on the consumer's part. I don't think we as a consumer understand how hard it is to make these games, or how these decisions are made, or the time frame. So can you kind of give people a behind the scenes look on how that comes out every year is kind of put into production, and where you have to figure out how you're going to take your steps to create that game?
Yeah. So there's portions of production that are always true. Like you go through a discovery phase, a pre-production phase, a production phase, an alpha phase, a beta phase. And on Madden, or any annual sports title, that is very compressed. And so anytime you want to do something big and transformative, it might take you multiple cycles and lots of resources to do that. Depending on your engine, some things are easy and some things are very difficult and take a lot of time. Madden is a very screen-heavy game. Like UI, it's just got like thousands and thousands of screens, and UI traditionally is not the cheapest thing to build. But it varies from team to team and from project to project. For those designers who are on the Unreal Engine, which is a lot of the industry now, rapid prototyping is a huge deal, and you can build a lot of stuff yourself and kind of prove it out without needing engineers and UI people and artists to do it for you. Whereas, on Madden, a lot of it was like you have to pitch your idea to a group via paper form or via a deck and get people excited about it without them actually having a chance to play it and feel it. But now that, on Homefront and Unreal, very designer-driven tool set, you can basically build something yourself and put it in people's hands and be like, what do you think? So that's like one of the key differences. But yeah, game development is hard. But, to a certain degree, like once you're in that mode where you understand that your project is an annual release title, you understand what you have to work with. You understand how much runway you have to work with. And, not every idea is going to work. I'm a perfect example of that. Like target passing is an idea that didn't work. Aggressive catching is an idea that wasn't tuned effectively and was missing a key component, like a key counter. And these are things that I beat myself up before to this day. But I understand people's frustration when they don't get what they want, especially when they're as invested as a lot of the Madden audiences.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if people know what they want. At the end of the day, as somebody that's part of that consumer base, I think I kind of fall into that same category, because I'm somebody that continues to sit there and go, franchise needs updated, franchise needs updated, franchise needs updated. Well, then EA comes out this year. They do some updates for franchise. They said that they fixed how the computer drafts people, how they do these things. But then it also hits me as a consumer. Well, wait a minute. I'm not playing a whole lot of computer stuff on franchise mode. Now I'm playing all CFM. So fixing the computer doesn't do anything. So now I'm still mad as a consumer because it's still not something else. So I'm not even sure that the consumer really even knows what we want. But it also brings into the next one. These leagues now are starting to become an all online connected thing where everybody wants control of their own team. How does that change how franchises are attacked from behind the scenes if it's no longer about playing the computer?
I think a lot of those things are not that far apart as they might seem. A lot of the investments in franchise kind of work for both the offline and the online player. I don't see too much distinction. And usually an investment in franchise mode is going to benefit both parties. the real issue right now is, and I think all the sports games are facing this, with the amount of money that's flowing in for microtransactions and MUT and FUT, et cetera. But even like in the 2K stuff and MLB, it makes it very hard to make a case for we should invest in franchise if franchise isn't monetized, right? There is a ton of money flowing in through these other modes, and so they have priority, and they're grabbing all the resources, and they're the ones who have to be big and fresh because, you know, they're having $1 million days or $1 million weekends, or they're just constantly bringing in money. And the more things start to shift towards, you know, you can get the game for free on Game Pass or PS Now or whatever it is, the more, you know, that money that flows in through these modes becomes more and more important. So for me, and this was like towards the end of my time there, I was really starting to push this question of, is the answer that to monetize franchise? Because once you monetize franchise mode and we can prove that people are willing to, you know, spend on microtransactions in that mode, then the emphasis would shift back again. And now we've proven that this mode brings in money too, so we should invest here. Unfortunately, I didn't stick around long enough to see that realized. But the alternative to me is not acceptable, which is, you know, you're starving out one of your main modes that, you know, millions of people are playing and is sort of the foundation of your license with the NFL, is to make a simulation football experience. And largely that's getting ignored for the reasons that I just talked about. So I think, you know, they got to solve it. And I think probably the way you're going to end up seeing it solved is if someone figures out a creative way to monetize those modes.
Gotcha. One of the things that kind of came out once Madden 22 was released was the hashtag movement. Now, Twitter is continuing to grow, social media is continuing to grow, and we're starting to see more people latch on to this Me Too movement. Do you think that this is an appropriate way for people to kind of get their heard?
What else you got? You know, it's at this point, I don't know what alternative there is. I mean, I remember a bunch of boycott pack weekends movements and other kind of social uprisings. And I think ultimately it can be effective. I'm sure that the development team looks at stuff like that, or their marketing department looks at stuff like that and says, you know, obviously we need to do something, which is why I think Sean Grady, the EP, put out that video statement about investments in franchise that would be forthcoming throughout the year. That was a direct response to the social media uprising. And so you have to argue that because he sent out that message, that the outrage was effective at least getting them to recognize and respond to it. Now, whether people are end up happy with the end result is another question, but I don't see any other tools that users have other than to self-organize and get that hashtag trending, because all other options haven't really been that effective. The Game Changer program, which was there for the entire time that I was there, where we brought in some of the top influencers to talk to the dev team, to play early builds, to give us feedback on what people were saying. A lot of it flowed right back to franchise mode and wanting more franchise investments. And for the first few years, we actually did that. Madden 15 through 17 was a lot of investment in franchise based on feedback from that group. But as I said earlier, when MUT's bringing in all the money, it makes it really hard to argue for resources for franchise mode. And that's kind of, I think, why we're seeing what we're seeing these days, that like, hey, another year where franchise has been starved or franchise has been ignored. But again, there is hope, because all it takes is, you know, one executive producer to say, I've seen enough, put 30 people on franchise mode, and then you're going to have a great year.
Right. So one of the things that bothered me, like, is I love the hashtag movement. I love that people came together for a common cause. But one of the things that I was not a fan of was watching all of the messages that were going to actual Can you just kind of do you have these guys back when it comes to some of the hate, because they're doing a job that they're told to do? I mean, we all have bosses. So when you see some of these guys that are just working on rosters, or just working on these things, catching a ton of flack, are these the right avenues that we should be going towards these people? Are these the guys that we should be reaching out to? And if so, what should these messages be looking like?
That's a great question. Part of the problem here is that, certain developers choose to be on social media, and they choose to engage, and they choose to be there because they want to listen to what the fans have to say. They care about what the audience says. Unfortunately, that puts you in a position where if someone's frustrated, they're going to come at you. And video games have this way, especially competitive video games, have this way of, making people rage when anything doesn't go their way. And so you have options of like swallow your rage, or go on a Reddit board or a forum somewhere, Operation Sports or something like that, or go directly to the source and attack whatever developer you can find and vent your frustration there. So like, I get it. I think, during my time, part of the problem is, I think from a corporate perspective, EA didn't understand how to handle it. And it just was this source of friction for them. And like, oh, we don't like that our developers are out here engaging and getting attacked. And, I think at one point, just recently, actually, Epic banned a competitive Fortnite team because a member of that squad told their creative director, Donald Mustard, to kill himself. And so Epic immediately responded by disqualifying that team. I would have appreciated EA corporate having my back like that, but that's not the way it went down, right? They were like, just get off social media, like spare yourself the pain and the agony. And the problem is no matter how thick you think your skin is, and no matter how much you think you can take it, it's mentally taxing. It wears you down. Like, I don't care who you are, getting attacked like that on social media and having haters and people telling you that you're terrible at your job, it wears you down. And I'm sure that to this day, if you look at Craello or Clint or Dustin or many of the others, I really feel for them because I went through it too. And I'm sure that once Clint leaves, if he ever leaves, in a few years' time, they'll all think he was a champion and be begging for him to come back, just like they are with me. It's just the way the universe works, unfortunately. But I wish there were a better avenue or a better solution. But to be honest, like, it's a tough one. And it's not just a Madden thing. It's true across all of gaming right now.
Right. One of the things I thought was really cool about getting you on the interview today is you were around when Madden and NCAA transitioned from Xbox 360 to Xbox One,
yes,
correct? And so what was that transition like? And what do you think the guys in the rooms now are experiencing with this transition to next gen?
This transition, from what I've heard and what I understand, was not as big in terms of transitioning, because of platform differences, especially for the Xbox, very seamless transition to go from one to the other. EA has a ton of resources and they can hire very quickly. And they can also work with outside vendors to throw bodies at problems like this. The bigger one for me, and the one that I really remember as being disruptive, was the transition to Frostbite. Because you're talking about like, a first-person shooter engine. It was built to make Battlefield. It is not a public domain engine. So it doesn't have kind of the investment that you'd have in like a Unity or an Unreal, where it's like there's hundreds of developers working with this thing and asking for stuff. Transitioning a first-person shooter engine like Battlefield, like Frostbite, to a sports format was a massive undertaking. And the scope of that kind of blew my mind. And in many ways, from my perspective, I felt like it set us back because instead of pushing forward, we were just kind of resetting and rebuilding around this new engine, this new paradigm. I'm not going to be the guy who tells you that Frostbite is difficult to work with. I mean, all engines in their way can be difficult to work with and have their own limitations. But resetting the entire project around this new engine, I look back and I question whether it was actually worth it and whether it wouldn't have made more sense to just keep going with what we had, updating it. EA had this sense of getting everyone on one platform and everybody sharing features and investments across the groups. But, you know, how much investment sharing and feature sharing are you going to get between an FPS and a sports title? And in my experience, the answer was not that much. And so, you know, that was bigger and more impactful in my experience than any console hardware switchover.
Got you. Have you had a chance? Okay, so before I ask this question, when Madden transitioned over to the Xbox One, that was my first dive into connected franchise mode. I joined a league. We got to 32 people. That has then transformed into this community that I'm now a part of. It's got like 150 different gamers, all wanting to sim or play games as sim as possible. But we're not the league out there that does this. There's now hundreds of communities out there that are doing things like the Soden Bowls, that are doing play-by-plays for the game. They have their own play-by-play people. They've got overlay graphics. I mean, they're pretty much competing with an ESPN or an NBC, like when these games come on. Have you had a chance to dive into any of those communities and kind of see what you've helped create?
No, to be honest, like I don't even play it that much anymore because it's almost like when you end a relationship and you move on, the last thing you want to do is keep dabbling around in that old relationship. It just reminds you of kind of hurt and pain. And plus, you know, to fully devote yourself to the next thing, it's important that you don't look backwards, which kind of sucks in a way because It used to be like one of my favorite games. But even now, you know, I like it. I played this year's version. I played last year's version a little bit, but I don't play them like I used to. And I don't hang out in Madden Twitch chats anymore. And it, you know, it hurts a little bit because I built some great relationships back then. And I used to love just watching people play and engaging with sim leagues and stuff like that. But reading Operation Sports threads. But, you know, it hurt when I left. It was like, you know, leaving your dream job is almost like a, you know, watching a relationship crumble. And you just have to move on. You can't look backwards. And so for those reasons, I don't really engage as much anymore.
Got it. And I want you to know that from our standpoint, from the community standpoint, we absolutely love the time and energy you put into something that's huge passions, not just for you, but for all of us. When you look back at your time, and now that time is over, what can you say that you are most proud of for what you contributed to the football world in the gaming community?
Oh, that's a great question. I'd say like the first few years, all the way up till almost Madden 17, we did a lot of sim push. You know, a lot of very heavy, authentic football features. You know, wide receiver DB interaction. Clint did a lot of work on, you know, offensive defensive line interaction, double teams, stuff like that. People don't realize, you know, if you go back to those years, those things were just missing. The game just didn't have them. And it's easy to kind of like focus on today's problems, but the foundation of sim football that we introduced is probably what I'm most proud of. And, you know, there was a guy, when I got hired, the EP of Madden was a guy named Cam Weber. And Cam hired me and this other guy named Colby Launchbaugh, who was kind of ran franchise mode while I was there, while I was focused on gameplay. And he hired us based on the premise of authentic simulation football. And over time, Cam got promoted. I think he's now like the VP of the entire sports label. And over time, things shifted, and MUT became the important thing, and esports became the important thing, and authentic simulation football was no longer the primary razor. But what I am most proud of is the years where we focused on that. And we had Madden in the high 80s with a pretty decent user score. And I remember even one day I high-fived the senior producer and said, we're finally winning over Operation Sports. Like, the sim strategy is paying off. We had a huge year, Madden 16, bonuses were through the roof, and everyone was really excited about what we had. And I'm really proud of that investment that we made during those years.
That's awesome. From there, we now break into some uncharted territory, right? Because you are now the lead designer and the lead game designer over at Sony. What can you tell us about your new role?
Not much, unfortunately, other than, it's rare in your career that, you don't just get one of your dream jobs, but you get a second shot at a dream job. I work for Sony Music. And there is a strategy called One Sony where they're trying to take different divisions and cross-blend the function of those divisions to create new products. And so this is sort of the cross-pollination between the interactive division and the music division. And so Sony Music said, what kind of interactive experience could we build? And there's no obvious answers to that question. And I just happened to, interview for it. And they showed me some of their prototypes. And I said, oh, my God, please hire me. This is the most amazing thing. And I just have a million ideas. And I'm getting a chance to, instead of work on something that's got 20 years of history behind it and is a known quantity like football, to something that nobody's ever tried before, and there are no clear answers for. And you can't really point at any competitive products and say, oh yeah, we're just like this. We're headed in uncharted territory and new directions, but it's really exciting, and I can't wait to share it someday. But it's probably a ways off because, again, it's big on innovation, and as you know, Sony takes their time with things to make sure that they deliver the highest quality product possible. But yeah, every day I just shake my head, and I'm so thankful and so grateful that I have an opportunity to work on this thing. But if you love music and you love gaming, you're going to be very, very excited about what I'm working on.
Have you pitched to them Reverant 2
No,
yet?
it's not on my mind. Actually, the old owner of that studio's at Riot now, and we trade emails every once in a while about getting the band back together. But I'm so happy where I'm at currently. There's not a project in the world or a company that could get me to leave.
All right, Rex, before we get you off, I've got a couple games that I thought would potentially be good ideas. So as you being a game developer, I'm going to throw them at you, and I would just like your feedback to tell me, would these be good ideas, or do you think they'd be flops? And you can be as honest with me as possible, all right? An open world type Pokemon game has been talked about since the day that franchise was released. Would that be something you think would catch
any Pokemon game is going to catch a mainstream audience?
All right, what about a new type of pirate exploration game?
I would say I would not try to compete with Ubisoft. I think Black Flag has been in development for long enough where when they do finally announce it again, it's going to be something big and special, and they have a foundation for naval combat. Be very hard to compete with, so I'd stay out of that.
What about heading off into space, the ultimate frontier?
Yeah, I think that has some potential. No Man's Sky is sort of your market leader there in terms of open world space exploration. There are some other really, really good ones. Elite Dangerous is another good example of a hardcore space sim. And then if you're really into like tactics and stuff like that, I forget the name of it, but there's a hugely popular MMO space shoot, I can't remember the name of it, but it's a pretty crowded genre right now.
What about The Rock's new feature, the XFL?
I don't like. I would wait until I see like how the league comes around. I do think there's an opportunity for someone to make a football game if a new league takes off, but I would, based on the investment profile, you'd have to invest to build a football game from the ground up. You better make sure that your brand partner has enough market viability before you take that on.
Now, this next one is my last one. It's my favorite one on this list. But Battle Royale has become something that has caught the gaming industry by storm over the last few years. Why have we not seen the actual Hunger Games game yet?
Well, that's a pretty good question. I don't know which studio owns that, but it's a lot of the movie studio driven game things like WB Games and stuff like that. What would probably end up happening is a studio like that would want to work with somebody who already had a proven engine and model for a battle royal game. And unfortunately, those games are doing so well right now that they're, Epic's obviously too busy focusing on Fortnite, and Respawn's too busy focusing on Apex. And so, you're not going to come in and say, hey, make us our Hunger Games game, because they would have to basically hire a whole nother team working with that technology to build that thing. And those investments are pretty massive. And so unless they were to announce that they were launching a new Hunger Games movie series, so that the market would be viable and you'd have sort of this big marketing investment going on, it doesn't make too much sense to make something based on a license that's now like, 5, 6, 7 years removed.
Yeah, so they missed
Which
their
usually
boat,
is what the case is, unless you basically start your development when you're starting your movie. But as long as you're pushing forward, like I think a good example is, I think there's a WB studio, is it Rocksteady, that I believe is working on a film series. I'm not sure if it's been announced, so I got to be careful. But as long as there's another movie coming out in the near future and maybe sequels, like if you were to say that somebody tomorrow was going to announce a Guardians of the Galaxy game, and we know that they're going to make, future movies in that series, then it starts to make a whole lot more sense.
Rex, man, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you coming on to do this show. Like, any thank you is not going to be enough. This was an awesome conversation, man. Is there anything that you would like to plug or let your fans and listeners know before let you get out?
I really appreciate all the positive sentiment. Not all of what you said is true earlier. Towards the end of my time on Madden, I was pretty burnt out. And there were definitely some relationships internally that I wish I had handled better. They did not always get the best version of me, and I'm truly sorry for that. But basically that's it. I try not to think about it because I try not to live in the past, but there were a lot of things I wish I had done better, and I wish I could have delivered for the community.
When you are able to kind of dive in more about what's going on with Sony, can we get you back on? And
sure, I imagine I'll be pretty busy by then, but we can give it a shot.
Absolutely, Rex. Thank you again for your time. Guys, this was the League Crawler Podcast. Make sure that you subscribe. If you have not reached out or you are not following Rex, get over to his Twitter. It is at Rex_Dickson_. Great follow, great human being. Rex, thank you for your time. Guys, we will see you next week.